On the morning of December 21, 1988, Pan American World Airways posted the results of its third quarter financial report. It was the most profitable quarter in the airline's entire 61-year history. For the first time in years, the people inside Pan Am headquarters actually believed they were going to make it. That same evening, at exactly 7:03 p.m., a bomb hidden inside a Toshiba cassette recorder detonated in the cargo hold of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. 270 people were killed. And Pan Am, the greatest airline in the history of the world, had exactly 3 years left to live.
October 28, 1927, Key West, Florida. A single propeller float plane lifts off the surface of the water carrying a bag of mail bound for Havana, Cuba. 90 miles, 50 minutes. An unremarkable route, flown by an unremarkable aircraft, operated by a company that had existed for less than 2 weeks. Nobody watching it that morning could have imagined what it would become. The man behind it was Juan Terry Tripp. 28 years old, Yale-educated, a former Navy pilot who flew during the First World War and came back convinced that aviation was going to reorganize the entire world. Tripp was not a dreamer, he was a strategist, and from the very first day, his strategy was simple: build a monopoly. While every other airline in America was scrambling for domestic routes, short hops, city to city, Tripp looked outward. He went to Washington. He lobbied. He convinced the U.S. government that Pan Am should be the sole American carrier operating overseas routes, positioning the airline as a kind of unofficial instrument of American foreign policy. Washington agreed, and Pan Am got a government-backed monopoly on every international route it could reach. Within 2 years, Pan Am's routes stretched from Miami to Buenos Aires, 12,000 miles of airspace, connecting the United States to Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Panama, Colombia, Peru, and beyond. By the early 1930s, Tripp was done with Latin America. He looked west. In 1935, Pan Am shipped $500,000 worth of aeronautical equipment across the Pacific on a merchant ship. It had construction crews building landing strips on remote islands nobody had ever heard of: Midway, Wake Island, Guam. On November 22, 1935, the China Clipper lifted off from Alameda, California, and flew to Manila, the first ever trans-Pacific commercial flight. The journey took 4.5 days. Pan Am was doing the impossible. 4 years later, in 1939, Pan Am crossed the Atlantic. By the time the Second World War broke out, it was operating on 88,478 route miles, serving 52 countries, running 192 radio and weather stations, and employing 8,750 people. It wasn't just an airline, it was the spine of the entire global air travel network. But Tripp wasn't finished. In October 1955, Juan Tripp walked into Boeing's headquarters and ordered 20 Boeing 707 jets, the first commercial jets ever purchased by an American airline. He also ordered 25 Douglas DC-8s at the same time. It was a $269 million order in 1955. To understand how crazy that is, you need to understand how much that would be worth today. Quick number crunching and accounting for inflation, that $269 million in 1955 would be worth about $3.2 billion today, as at 2026. $3.2 billion. Executives across the industry thought he had lost his mind. On October 26, 1958, Pan Am 707 lifted off from New York and landed in Paris. The jet age had begun. and Pan Am had started it. Through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, Pan Am became something no airline, even today, has ever been since. It wasn't just transportation, it was aspiration. It was America's promise to the world that technology and ambition could collapse distance, erase borders, connect anyone, anywhere. Hollywood stars flew Pan Am, presidents flew Pan Am. Charles Lindbergh was on the payroll. If you don't know who that is, he was the first man to successfully fly an airplane across the Atlantic Ocean. The waiting list for Pan Am's proposed moon flights, yes, moon flights, had 93,000 names on it. Pan Am was the future, the whole glittering, impossible future. And then it happened.
In 1966, Juan Trippe did something that stunned the entire aviation world. He ordered 25 Boeing 747s, the largest commercial aircraft ever built, before the plane even existed. You might be confused. Didn't he buy some Boeings earlier? Do not mistake them. They are different planes. These ones didn't even exist at the time and were twice the size of the former ones. Pan Am was the launch customer, the airline that bet its entire future on a plane that had never flown. Boeing built a factory from scratch just to build the 747. Pan Am's order made it possible. The first 747 entered service on January 22, 1970. It could carry 490 passengers. It was basically a cathedral in the sky. For context, it was 231 feet and 10 inches long. That's over 70% the length of an American football field. 63 feet and 5 inches tall. That's the height of a 7-story building. Pan Am had 65 of them. But here is what nobody said out loud at the celebration. Pan Am had borrowed billions to buy those planes. Billions they did not have, betting on passenger demand that was about to evaporate. In 1973, OPEC announced an oil embargo against the United States. Overnight, jet fuel prices exploded, and Pan Am, the airline with 65 fuel-guzzling 747s financed entirely on debt, was staring into a hole it could not see the bottom of. But that wasn't the bombshell. The bombshell was this. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed the Airline Deregulation Act, and with a single stroke of a pen, he destroyed the one thing Pan Am's entire business model had been built on for 50 years. The government granted monopoly on international routes that Trippe had spent his entire career constructing, the legal wall that kept every American competitor out of Pan Am's airspace, was gone. Overnight, American Airlines, United, TWA, and a swarm of new low-cost carriers flooded into Pan Am's routes, and Pan Am had nothing to fight back with. Because while every other major U.S. airline had spent decades building domestic route networks, Pan Am had always been international only. It had no domestic routes, no domestic passengers to funnel onto its international flights. Trippe's monopoly had made that unnecessary, until now. Pan Am soon realized it had been built for a world that no longer existed. To fix the domestic problem, Pan Am's president, William Sewell, went shopping. In 1979, Pan Am acquired National Airlines for $437 million. It was a bidding war they didn't need to win, at a price they couldn't afford to pay. The deal was supposed to give Pan Am a domestic network. Instead, it gave Pan Am $437 million of additional debt, a 157% increase in fuel costs, and a labor force that refused to integrate. They just couldn't catch a break. The airline started selling everything it owned just to stay airborne. 1980, Pan Am sold its 50% stake in Falcon Jet Corporation. November 1980, the Pan Am building in Midtown Manhattan, one of the most famous skyscrapers in New York, sold to MetLife for $400 million. 1981, the Intercontinental Hotels chain, which Pan Am had built from nothing into a global luxury brand, sold to pay off debts. In 1985,
Pan Am sold the entire Pacific route network it had spent decades and hundreds of millions of dollars building to United Airlines. By 1988, Pan Am had been stripped down to its transatlantic core. New management had come in. A new CEO, Thomas Plaskett, had spent the entire year rebuilding, refurbishing aircraft, improving operations, cutting costs. And then, against all odds, it was working. In the third quarter of 1988, Pan Am posted its most profitable quarter ever. Inside the company, people dared to believe again. And then, on December 21, 1988, a Semtex bomb hidden inside a cassette recorder detonated over Scotland. 270 people dead. A $300 million lawsuit. A fine from the FAA for 19 security failings. Bookings collapsed. Passengers canceled flights by the hundreds of thousands. Pan Am's transatlantic load factors fell off a cliff. What had been Pan Am's most profitable quarter ever was followed almost immediately by catastrophic, unrecoverable losses. And there was something else, something that wouldn't come out for months. There had been a warning. A specific, credible bomb threat had been received before Flight 103 departed. U.S. authorities had been aware of a threat against Pan Am flight over the holiday period. The warning had reportedly reached the desk of Pan Am's own security team in Frankfurt and was found buried under a pile of papers the day after the bombing. 270 people gone. And the question of what was known, when, and by whom has never been fully answered. By 1990, Pan Am was fighting for survival on every front. The Gulf War sent fuel prices through the roof again. Global air travel demand collapsed. The airline was bleeding $3 million a day. Plaskett, the CEO, went looking for a buyer. Delta Airlines stepped forward. The deal was structured in stages. Delta would acquire Pan Am's transatlantic routes, the Pan Am Shuttle, 45 jets, and the Frankfurt hub. But there was more. Delta also offered to buy 51% of the remaining airline, keeping Pan Am alive as a company, just smaller. Pan Am accepted. The bankruptcy court approved the asset sales. Delta took the transatlantic routes, Delta took the shuttle, Delta took the planes, Delta took the terminals. And then, Delta said no. After taking everything it wanted, the most valuable routes, the most valuable planes, the most valuable infrastructure, Delta quietly withdrew its offer to purchase 51% of the remaining airline. No explanation, no counteroffer, just no. Pan Am had sold Delta the only pieces left that were worth anything. What remained was a carcass, a skeleton of Latin American routes, and a name. Without the transatlantic routes, without the shuttle, without the Frankfurt hub, without the 45 jets, Pan Am had no revenue base left to operate from. Within weeks, Pan Am was out of money entirely. On December 4, 1991, at 11:59 p.m., Pan American World Airways ceased all operations. The last flight, Pan Am Flight 436 departing Bridgetown, Barbados, landed in Miami, taxied to the gate, and went dark. It was over. 7,500 employees lost their jobs in a single night. Thousands of passengers were stranded across the globe. A company that had connected the world for 64 years, that had invented the jet age, that had flown the first transoceanic routes, that had put a waiting list together for moon flights, was gone. Not slowly, not gracefully, overnight. Pan Am owed its creditors over $2.5 billion at the time of its collapse. Its assets were valued at a fraction of that. The Pan Am name, its brand, its logo, were sold in 1998 to a railroad holding company called Guilford Transportation Industries, which renamed itself Pan Am Systems and still operates to this day, running freight trains across New England under the ghost of the greatest airline that ever flew. There have been multiple attempts to resurrect the brand over the decades. Small regional carriers, charter operations, all of them have eventually vanished. The 93,000 people on Pan Am's moon flight waiting list never got their tickets. The World Port Terminal at JFK, the elliptical, futuristic building that Pan Am built to announce itself to the world, was demolished in 2013. In 2022, the alleged bomb maker of Pan Am Flight 103 was taken into U.S. custody. His trial is currently scheduled for 2026. More than 3 decades after 270 people fell from the sky over Scotland, the case is still not closed. Pan Am did not die because it stopped dreaming. It died while it was in the middle of one, in the most profitable quarter it had ever seen, on the best day its turnaround had produced, with a full plane climbing toward 31,000 feet over the Atlantic.